Everyone, and welcome to another Wargaming terrain tutorial. This week's video we're going to be looking at different ways to make trees for the tabletop or for your dioramas. So I'm currently out in the backyard looking for some materials for today's build. Hopefully you'll find this one a little bit helpful. Let's get started. Now, I did just want to really quickly start today's video by showing you how to make some real simple bases for this. Now this only covers around about a minute of the video, so if you're wanting to skip through, just go through around about minute 40, and that's where we start these trees. Now this is just some scraps of MDF that I've got, and I've just sort of sanded those edges a little bit smooth, and I'm also using some scraps of XPS insulation foam from last week's rock build, and I'll put a link to that video above for you. Now, the PVA glue I'm using here, it works fine on the MDF. For the XPS foam it works alright. When you're gluing the XPS together, however, it does take quite a while for that to dry. It may not be the best glue to use. If you've got any suggestions on which way to go there, please let me know. It did work fine in the end, but as I said, it does take a little while to dry. Now once you've got that dried, you can just start shaping that up to whatever you like. I'm just using my Stanley knife here just to shave these scraps back down to the size of the MDF and give it a bit of a beveled edge. So that's what I like about the XPS foam. It's really easy to shape and make it whatever you need. We'll also be pushing our trees into this XPS foam, which works really well, as you'll see later in the video. I'm giving this a quick coat of black paint, Mod Podge and water here. This just kind of seals up that foam, allows me to paint it with whatever I want down the track, and it also gives it a nice matte finish which helps take the paint later on. Now from there you can add whatever details you like once they're dried. I will be adding some details later on in the video. But for now, let's get stuck into these trees. This first tree I'm using here is a set I bought off AliExpress. They were really cheap and honestly quite nasty. I'm not a big fan of these trees at all. I haven't actually used them too much in my dioramas or builds. I am going for more dead trees today, so that's the reason I'm trimming this one way back and not adding any sort of greenery to this one. It's not too bad. I mean, in a pinch, it's probably a solution for you. I did use it on one of my builds, as you'll see towards the end of the video. However, it's still pretty bad. It's got really bad mold lines on it. One thing I did find that was handy was once I trimmed it all off, I actually got these little spiky fern looking things that I can reuse, so I'll be keeping these and probably putting them into some bases down the track. Now while I was out the back this morning, I did find some branches I can use. Now what I did find was that if you can find a hedge or a shrub of some kind, usually those are the better way to go. The trees and stuff I had out the back, most of the branches really didn't have the scale I was looking for, but this thing here, as you can see, it's probably a little bit large, but there's quite a few little bits on here that we can break off, and these will make perfect dead trees for my bases and my dioramas down the track. Again, they're probably a little bit flimsy. Like I get people might say, what's the point? They're going to break really easily. But given that most of this stuff is you know, sitting on the shelf, and it's only going from my shelf to my table at the best, so it is really simple to use these. And as you can see here that I used on the last week's rock build, they're really effective. So you can just push these straight into the foam. If you do end up breaking one off, you can just push another one in there, so it's not a big deal. I find these are going to be great. These are probably one of my favorite of the builds that we get through today, so definitely if you have a look around, if you're down at the park, you know, just rip off a branch of a shrub or a hedge or something like that, leave it to dry, and you should have something pretty similar to that. Now the next one we're going to do is a little bit more complicated. I do enjoy this one as well. It takes a little bit more work to complete, but it does give you a really cool tree effect, this one. So I'm just using some really light gauge wire here. I'm going to cut these into lengths of around about 40 centimeters. In the end, this gave me a tree that was maybe about 10 centimeters or around about 4 inches high. So this worked out pretty good. If you want something larger than that, obviously you can just use larger pieces of wire. So I cut myself for this around about 8 or 9 pieces of wire here to make this first tree that you'll see in the video. It doesn't have to be straight wire. We're going to be bending it and doing all sorts of things with this, so it doesn't really matter. I ran out of wire. If you're wanting thicker trees, all you need is more pieces of wire. So thinner trees with less pieces of wire, but it will also end up giving you less branches in the end. So keep that in mind. It's best to have a bit of a play around. This is a bit rough on your fingertips as you go through bending this. You could probably use pliers But as you see, as I get into the build of this one, there's quite a bit of work involved in this, but the outcome at the end is really effective. So there are some other videos on doing this on YouTube, so definitely I'm no expert on it. I have built a couple of them now, and I think the outcome I get is really good for me, which is essentially someone that doesn't really know what they're doing. So don't be afraid to tackle this one. It is a really easy project to do. So not a lot of skill involved. It just takes a little bit of extra work, but the outcome you get, I think, is really effective. So first thing, all we're going to do here is just bend these in half and create a small loop at the bottom. You don't want this loop to be too big. This loop here will make up the roots for the base of the tree, so if you're wanting lots of roots that go out a long way, you could probably just make this loop a little bit bigger down the bottom. So once we've created that loop, all we're going to do is start twisting this wire together. Now if you're using a thinner gauge wire, this won't be too rough on your hands. If you're using a thicker gauge wire, you might find this a little bit trying on your fingertips as you go through. But we're just going to twist that up to create a bit of a trunk at the base of the tree, and then we're going to peel out a couple, probably 3 or 4, it doesn't really matter. This is going to be our first branch, so all we're going to do is basically the exact same thing. We're going to create 2 little strands here with a couple of bits of wire in each strand, and we're going to start twisting that out. Now that's going to be the first branch of our tree at the low end, and just twist them together until they start literally branching out from the trunk of the tree there. And once you've got it to the sort of length you want that branch to go out before the twigs and stuff come off it, you want to start creating another loop in there. So just bend the first strands back and create a loop at the base at the end of this branch. So I know this is a little bit confusing perhaps in my description, but as we get through the video you'll see how this comes together. So all we're doing there is creating a small branch out and then creating some more loops for the end. Now I will speed up the video a little bit at this point because it is basically just going over that same thing over and over. Now don't worry too much about the extra bits of wire that you'll be having poking out from creating those loops and doing the twists. You can clean those up towards the end of the build or use them as branches themselves. So just work your way through creating more branches as you go and more loops at the end, and as you'll see as we get through this build we'll be able to trim those up and also clean them up and make some really effective looking branches here. So as you can see there, I'm just creating another couple of loops. You can do these individually or pair them up with another wire that might be sitting next to it. The larger the loop you create, obviously the longer the branch can be. So just go through twisting these on and making those loops at the end of each branch that you're creating, and just leave them as loops for this point. You don't want to cut them just yet. Just makes it a lot easier to handle this tree as we work our way up to the top. Now as I mentioned at the start of this build, having more wires at the start will give you more opportunities to make more branches. This can be very handy, particularly towards the top of the tree, and also having a longer wires is a lot more effective than having shorter wires. So you can always trim these wires back if you find the tree has reached the height that you want it to, but you can't add wires onto it if you've cut them all too short. So you're better off if you've got plenty of wire on hand to make these a little bit longer than shorter. So as you can see here, this tree has come together. I've created all the loops that I need at the top there for those branches, and now I'm just going to start quickly working on this root system down the bottom. So all I'm going to do here is just split these into 2 to start off with, and create a couple of root systems out of these. So what you want to do is split these off. Each set of loops that you sort of twist together will create its own little root system, and eventually towards the end of these you'll start splitting them off into individual loops. Now I've probably left these a little bit short, so my loop was maybe a little bit short in this instance, but it still works fine. It'll still sit on the tabletop by itself without requiring a base, but I will show you a way to base these later on in the video as well. So in the end, as you can see here, I've got all these little loops at the top and the end of each branch, and I've got all these loops down the bottom for the root system, and we're just about to start cutting into these, and I'll show you how we create these roots. So all we need to do is just cut the end right in about the middle of the loop that we've created. You just cut that, split it down the middle, and then using those same cutters, you just gently grab each strand of wire from that loop and just twist it back on itself, and without too much effort it will create really nice looking roots and really nice looking branches. So as you'll see here, I'm just doing some extra trimming up and some extra fine tuning of all of this, so you might find some of these loops are too long, so you might need to twist them up a little bit more, but all I'm doing there is just bending these really quickly, bending them back out of the loop, and you'll see that they come together really nicely to create this little root system down the bottom of the tree. Now, you really don't need to spend a lot of time shaping these branches and roots. All you need to do is just using your cutters very gently, so you don't cut these wires when you're doing this part, is just bend them back out of the loop, and straight away you'll see here very shortly that this does give us a really realistic sort of root system at the bottom of the tree, and it's the exact same process we'll use on the ends of the branches in just a moment. Now you can use this just sitting on the table as it is. I generally prefer to make a small base for this one as well, just to give it a little bit more weight and a little bit more stability on the table, but you can add this to a diorama as it is. Just using some PVA glue will glue it down easily. You could also use some clay or plaster to sort of embed it into your diorama if you wanted to. Now I'm just going to go through and do the exact same thing here that I did on the roots with all these branches. I'm just cutting those loops, and then I'm just going to start bending them back out of themselves, and you'll see here that it's come together really nicely, and we've got a pretty realistic looking tree. Now I am going to give this a bit of a coat with some brush on latex, as you'll see in a moment. Now the reason I'm doing that is just because I have that latex on hand. That brush on latex is just something I bought a very long time ago, and it does work well to give these a nice coat and cover up that wire look. I have heard of people using things like hot glue to cover these as well. I have not tried that yet myself. I'm sure it's just as effective as the brush on latex, but like I said, I've got quite a big bottle of that stuff, so I need to use it up, and that's what I'm going to be using for this build today. But as you can see, that tree has come together really nicely. The shape's good, the branches look pretty good, and being that it's made out of wire there, I can still shape that, move things around, and do what I need with it. But here we go, I'll just put this latex stuff on this one now and give it a coat. This latex takes a very long time to dry. You may need to, if you've got some of this on hand, you may need to give this a couple of coats. Generally, I think on the bottle it says to wait 24 hours between coats on this. I did give this one 2 coats, and yes, it did take a couple of days. This stuff's not too bad. It does smell pretty bad obviously, but it works a treat. Now with those bases, I've just used some PVA glue and a little bit of sand and just glued those on. I've also given the base, the XPS foam there, a quick coat of brown paint, and like I said, just some PVA glue and some sand on there. Now I picked up some cheap flock a little while ago. This stuff looks really good. It looks a little bit like dead grass, which is going to work really well with these dead trees that I'm trying to create for these bases. So first thing I'm going to do is just some watered down PVA glue there, and I'm also going to use this homemade grass applicator, which I did a video on a little while ago. I'll put a link to that one at the top of the video for you. This, while it looks cheap and nasty, and honestly it is cheap and nasty, it is still really effective. So I was really happy with the outcome of using this, so don't be afraid to have a go at this if you can't afford to get yourself a proper grass applicator. As you'll see here, even though this grass or this flocking I've got is really short stuff, you'll see here that it worked really effectively, and it definitely stands up, definitely does the job of a professional one as far as I can tell. So I have no real disappointments in using this thing, and it'll probably keep me going for a fair while yet. But this is starting to come together. I've got a few more details I want to add to this before I move on, but I've done that on both those bases now, and I'm just going to add a few little rocks. Now these were found in my backyard. I've just got some, I think this is like crusher dust or something like that, just some little pieces of gravel that I've got now that I've got a little bag of that I'll use for any of my basing stuff. These work fine. Honestly, I didn't even feel like they needed to be painted or changed colour. These will work well on this base. All I'm doing is just dipping them into some straight PVA glue there, and then just pressing them down into the grass, and these set in there really nicely and really well, so I had no real issues with this at all. It all worked fantastically in the end, and these bases have started to come together quite nicely. Now I will add a further few details to this down the track, But for now, I think we're ready just to, I can quickly show you how these little twigs I've got here will go into this base quite easily. So just sort of plan out where you want to put these, how you want to orientate these trees. And I honestly didn't even use glue for this part of this process. All I'm going to do is just press these straight down through the grass into the foam, and you'll see that these stand up pretty well. There's no real issues. Like I said, if you do end up breaking one of these, it's quite easy enough just to rip it out and put another one in there. You can't see the holes that are created when pressing these in, and they do stand pretty steady, so I have no regrets with this. I'm sure there are better ways and maybe more effective ways to do this that people may point out in the comments below, but if for a quick solution to having trees and simple bases, this worked really well. There's basically very little cost involved in making this setup. As I said, I found most of these materials in the backyard this morning, so I had no concerns about doing this at all, and like you can see there, that's coming together really well. Now I do have some more details that I want to add, and I've also got another tree that I want to build here very shortly, so we'll get stuck into that in just a moment. Now I'll point out, as I said, I didn't use this tree for today's build or in this base, but again, you could probably just push this straight down into that foam and it would be fine. I would probably glue that one though, just because it is a little bit thicker. Now here's one of the trees I made a little while ago using the twisted wire and the latex coating. It's come together really well. This one does have the greenery on it, so I won't be going through adding that stuff on today. As you can tell, I'm definitely no expert in doing that, and I still need to do a little bit of work and have a bit more of a play around to get these trees looking a little bit better with that greenery, so I won't include that in today's video. But you could certainly add this to that base. I would probably do it before adding the grass and the rocks on there though, so I won't be adding those trees to those bases today. I've got other plans. Now I am going to build this final tree here, and this is an idea I got just a couple of weeks ago from Eric's Hobby Workshop, so I will put a link to his video because he definitely did this in a fantastic way. He got a great outcome for his trees. I really liked it, so I wanted to just quickly include this one into today's video, but all credit goes to Eric for that one. Like I said, check out his video on making these trees. It is really effective and really good. I love these little things. So all I've done is just cut some twine there, and I've just separated the strands of the twine into these smaller sections, and then all you want to do is just spread these apart a little bit so that all the little individual strands there come apart. It looks like little tufts of hair or something. But we'll be using those. I've also got a couple of little bits of wire. Again, this is really thin gauge wire. I don't think it really matters what you use here. The thinner gauge wire is a little bit easier to manhandle when you come to get these to put together. So if you've got it on hand, I think this might be florist's wire or something, I'm not too sure. But it's definitely cheap stuff, otherwise it wouldn't be sitting in my bids box, I can tell you that. So I'm just going to give one of those wires a bit of a coat of PVA glue, as you can see there. This is just to help hold these little strands of twine that we've got here, just to hold them in place as we put it all together. I'm just going to lay these down on top of this and just press them in. It doesn't really matter how you do this, like I said, just make sure you've got all those little bits of twine separated at least a little bit. Now you want to put your two pieces of wire together. Now this is probably the fiddliest part of this build, is trying to get these to get that twist started. So all I've done is get these two bits of wire, tried to lay them as flat as I can. Now my wire wasn't straight, so it made this a little bit difficult, but as you'll see here, eventually it does work, it does get together. All you want to do is twist these wires against each other and create a long twist that goes for the length of these two bits of wire. Now in Eric's video you'll see he uses a power drill to speed up this process. I highly recommend doing that if you've got one on hand. So a little cordless drill, stick one end of the wire in there, hold on to the other end with a pair of pliers or something, and twist it up. Now as you can see, these ones have twisted up quite well. This was one long strand. I've cut it down the middle just because I wanted smaller trees here. One of them there on the right looks pretty good as it is, but we're definitely going to do some trimming there with the scissors as well, just to get these a little bit looking a little bit more like the dead pine tree look I'm going for. So just scissors on this, give it a bit of a tidy up, bit of a clean, shape it the way you want it, and this will be very effective little tree on those bases that we've created. So Eric's video, he also shows giving these a quick paint. I'm not going to worry about it for these ones. I think the colour of the twine for this looks pretty good. I'm probably only going to wreck it by taking it any further than that. So I'm going to leave those as they are, and as you can see here, here's all the trees we built today. So this was that first one we looked at. Again, like I said, I didn't use it. The mold lines on this are really bad. I'm not really liking the branches. They're all the same thickness and it doesn't look very realistic. Now, as I mentioned, I have used this in a diorama before. So one of my test builds I used this at the back of the hangar. It doesn't look too bad. It looks okay. You know, in a pinch, this will get you out of trouble. It looks like a tree, so it's not so bad, but probably not one I'll be using too often given the other techniques we've covered today. The other one we did was the twigs, so this was the little branches from the hedge out the back, and this has really come together nicely. I love these little bases with these little trees. I've also got the twisted wire one with the twine on there. They look fantastic. I'm really happy with those. I think I will be using that again. Thanks Eric for pointing that one out a couple of weeks ago. And like I said, make sure you check out his video and his channel. He's got some great builds on there. Now I did use one of those twigs in last week's rock build as well. Again, it's just pushed in there, so if it breaks off I can just pull it out and put another one in. So don't be worried too much about that. Here is the one that we did with the wire. Now again, this was coated with some brush on latex and given a quick paint. As a dead tree, it looks great. I'm happy with that. Here's one I did a little while ago with the greenery on it. Basically real simple to do. There's nothing too complicated about that. Takes a little bit more work, but those trees, they just look fantastic. Way better than buying the plastic ones, I think. If you don't go for the root system, you can see there where I've got one where I cut off the root system and just pushed it straight down into the XPS foam for that little diorama I've got there. Now if you want to, you can create this with some more rocks and a little scrap of PVA that, a little scrap of MDF that I had there to create that little base. And then you can just mold the root system over those rocks to give you something like you can see there. Really effective, gives it a nice big weight at the bottom of the tree as well, so that it will be a lot sturdier on your tabletop. This really did come together good. I'm happy with all these trees today, honestly. This one here you can see on its own there looks really good, really effective on that base with that dead grass as well. So look guys, I really appreciate you watching today. I hope you've been able to find something useful or helpful in the video. Thank you very much to my Patreon supporters. You guys are great. I really couldn't do this without you guys, so if you're looking to support me in any way, feel free to have a look at my Patreon page. There are a couple of different levels there of support. It really does come in handy for me to do this stuff. And if you've enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe. I'd love to hear your comments on any of these. If you've got other ways to make trees, please leave a comment and let me know. If you've got any tips on the way I've done this, also drop a comment below. Thanks guys, have a good one.